What is going on, everybody? Let me turn that music down, fix my camera. Got a new chair, so I'm like sitting a lot lower, which is kind of annoying. So I'm trying to like get used to everything. But how's everybody doing? And welcome into the live edit with me. Thanks, Richard, for joining in, and David. Thanks so much for hanging out. And David, yeah, let us know what your podcast is, and if you want to, drop a link in the comments so we can check it out. Uh, so, are you editing like all 18 at once and then releasing them all at once, or what's the process? Or did you just like have 1 through 18 minus 12, like releasing over time, and you're just now realizing 12 is missing? Let us know that situation. That's kind of funny. Um, so I know last time we did this on YouTube, I said that I was going to find a shorter episode. And I did. Okay, so I did one a couple weeks ago here on YouTube or in the Facebook group. I can't remember which. I think it was on YouTube. Um, and then I did one about a week and a half ago in the podcast editors club, and that one was a lot shorter. So that was only like 30 minutes once you get everything edited down. Um, so I was gonna do a shorter episode for this one, but I kind of dropped the ball on my podcast, and I am way behind. So we're gonna do that one today. It's the Podcast Editors Mastermind. It's a show for professional podcast editors. So if you edit for other people, it's kind of the business side of things. So we're going to be doing that. And it's, I think, about 45 minutes. So it's not quite the hour long that the first one was, but it's not as short as I would like. Um, so David's podcast is Movies by Minutes, cover a minute of screen time of the movie per episode. Whoa. That sounds intense. Okay, now I'm gonna have to check that out because I'm assuming that you're like, God, you got to go really in deep for that. That's awesome. Um, so yeah, today we're going to be editing the podcast editors mastermind. And for the sake of time, because it is 45 minutes and it's 4 tracks, I went ahead and did my pre-processing on my cleanup in RX already. I did that earlier today. So I'm just doing the Reaper side of things, try to speed this up because that's quite a process. But if you are interested in my RX process, go back and check out my the last live stream I did on YouTube. And we have a website. So if you haven't already checked it out, go to reaperforpodcasting.com slash live stream. And you'll have all the past live streams, and you can watch the current live stream there as well. Um, so yeah, so if you do want to see my RX process, you can watch my last live stream, or if you're not in the podcast editors club, or if you are in the club, you can watch the one there because I did do the whole shebang. Um, David releases one episode per week, but we got 40 of them in the can already. Wow. That's so convenient having like such that backlog. Unfortunately, with our podcast, so I do it with 4 other people: Brian Esminger, Carrie Caulfield, Eric, and Jennifer Longworth, and myself. Um, Despite being like podcast managers and professional podcast editors, we are like so unprofessional when it comes to our own show. So this show that the episode that I'm editing today should have come out this yesterday, which was 3 weeks after it was recorded. Because we do it live, so we do live on our Facebook page. We live stream it every other Thursday, and then 3 weeks later we release the audio. But I've just been so busy and I haven't made the time to do it, so I'm way behind. So that's why I'm doing this today, is because it really needs to get done, and what better opportunity than to do it in front of the world. Um, yeah, so got this one, and then we still have one more after that that we need to edit. So yeah, we are far from having a nice backlog. So don't do as I say, not as I do. Don't use us as an example of how to run a podcast. Um, but enough of that. Thanks so much for coming in. If you have any questions, I want this to be a learning experience, and I want you to see how I do things and take that and try to implement it in your own workflow. Um, so if you have any questions about the way I do things, please ask away. And I'll gladly show you because I have a ton of custom actions that I use. So I'll gladly show you how to do all those. And if there's anything like any advice that you can offer me and how I can be more efficient, I will gladly listen to that. Um, 1 second. All right. Sorry, my wife was calling. I don't know if she knew I was, or if she remembered I was streaming right now. So, anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and just jump on in to Reaper. So I already have. Um, excuse me. So this is my recording. So and to kind of keep things organized and clean, I'm going to go ahead and just start a new project. So this is my side of the recording. So I'm going to do one uh, for the whole thing. Oh, I already started one. Perfect. Okay. My cat is meowing outside the room. All right, so just to make sure I got the latest, let me just go ahead and bring in all of the audio. And we record this, so we record it live, or we stream it live, but we have everybody record their own audio. So this is all of our individual tracks. So we use StreamYard to actually do the streaming process. And we have a rough. And let me know if you can hear this. I want to make sure that the audio
teenagers, and it's the same type of thing that
looks
you
like
don't
it's working.
start with everything.
So I'm going to go to the end and kind of line this up because it should be roughly close ending at the same time. Beginning.
Yes, I'm ready.
So we do a clap sync since we're doing it over the internet. That's not, there's always that little bit of lag. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than trying to do with nothing. So this is Jennifer's. I know where hers is. This kind of looks like a clap. Yep.
Lauren Brighton.
Was that synced?
Okay. So that's her very quiet clap. And then last but not least,
hit record. Daniel's the Yeti. And I guess I'm the Sasquatch. Yeah.
or did I already do his? No.
Hit record. Daniel's the Yeti. And I guess I'm the Sasquatch. Yeah. There's this. That's the best.
I don't know if, excuse me, maybe our ex saw that as a mouth click or something, but it's kind of weird that those two are so quiet.
That's the best.
Perfect.
Was that synced?
And we're live.
And it's never a perfect sync, but it's close enough so that we don't have to struggle trying to get everything lined up. So it's generally in the right spot.
And And we're live here on the Podcast Editor Mastermind Show. Thank you all for joining us, those of you who are watching the live stream and those of you who are tuning in to the podcast. I'm Jennifer Longworth of Bourbon Barrel Podcasting, and below me is...
Brian Ensminger of Top Tier Audio, and beside me is
Daniel Abendroth of Roth Media.
And above Daniel is our special... Welcome to the show, Lauren!
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Okay. Excuse me. I always get like the tickle in my throat whenever I get nervous. So now
Do
I'm
I
going to... Well, first off, I'm going to mute Reaper so that way you don't have to listen to it. Because the way I do my leveling, if you saw any of my previous edit with me's, you'll know this. But I take a section that has like some of the loudest spots, and just put it on repeat, and then I can just use that to dial in my vocal writer. So I do 0 to 12, and then just slide this up to where at the loudest points the what's it called? The slider just hits 0. So that's nowhere near, so that's too loud. So I can bring it down a little bit. A little bit more, and that should be good. And then we get a little bit of a bigger chunk, still getting the loudest parts. But next I do the compressor. And I use the Shep's Omni channel because if I do need to add like any de-essing or more EQing, it's just kind of convenient. The other compressor I use is the Waves API 2500. Use that one for the longest time, and then Brian Isminger, who's on this episode, told me about this, and I bought it and then never used it, and then I kind of dove into it and I really liked it. So what I do is on the loudest points, I watch the gain reduction, and I don't want it to go... If this lights up a little bit on -6, I'm okay with that, but I don't want it to go beyond that. And you see it's getting into that -3, and I don't want to do too much at once. And so if I need some more compression, I can just add a second compressor, which would be the 2500. So we're going to throw on the limiter, set that up, and then bring in the WLM meter. And that way I can kind of monitor the loudness, excuse me, and the range. So already I can see it's a little too quiet, so I'm just going to turn up the output, reset, and then kind of let it go. Let me do something else. And this is kind of a tedious spot. Because it is just kind of quite a bit of just repeating. Does this work? Yeah. Okay, so you can see right here, the keys I press will be displayed. Let me try to scooch that over a little bit. Okay. So that way you can see what keys I'm pressing, and there it goes. Okay. So that way you can see what keys I'm pressing. So if you have any questions about what I'm doing, hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer. All right, so I get a big chunk when I'm monitoring the volume, the loudness. I get a big chunk that has quite a range. Just highlight that with the repeat on, and just kind of let it do its thing for a little bit. And that way you get a good section to kind of see what you're looking at. And then go ahead and turn it up just a smidgen. It's kind of a little quiet, but not too quiet. And obviously I'm looking for that -16 because I am monitoring it in stereo. If I had the mono version of this plugin active, then I would be looking at -19. So it's a little bit loud now, but I know I have like this quiet section coming up, and that's going to drop that a bit. Sheps is a Waves plugin. Yes, it is. I pretty much exclusively use Waves now. Um, so Vocal Writer obviously is a Waves. The Sheps Omni channel is Waves, and the WLM meter is Waves. Um, the only one that I use in my normal chain that's not Waves is Unlimited, which is from Sonic Anomaly, which is a free plugin. You might be able to find the VST out there, but you can also download it and install it through. Oops, messed that up. But you can. Oh, jeez. But you can install it through Repack. It's part of that. And if you watch my video on Repack, Repack and SWS, that's one of the things I show you. Is how to install Unlimited, which is a really nice compressor and limiter. All right, so this is doing pretty good. I can probably, the range of 2 LU is probably a little too much compression, so I'll just turn that down and kind of listen to it later. With less compression, it's probably going to be too loud, but we'll see. Yeah, and I'm working on a video for the plugins I use. So that I know somebody, I think in a comment on YouTube, somebody asked about it. So that should be coming out, well, whenever I get a chance to record it. I got one more coming out this week. I'm going to try to get up today or tomorrow. And that one is on external editors. So connecting RX and other editors to Reaper. And then I think the plugins is probably going to be the next one. I have to check my list. I have so many videos I want to make. My cat is being really loud. All right, so I think this is going to be pretty good. I don't want to drag this on too long, and I can always fix it in the end. So let's move on to Brian. So this one was Lauren. This was Brian. This one was me and Jennifer. Which I always misspell her name. I think there's 2 S and 1 N. So Brian is pretty not very dynamic. So probably don't even need a vocal writer. So we'll just start with the Sheps. And just finding the loud part, and it's going to make sure that the, excuse me, gain reduction doesn't go too strong. I'm nervous because he does get loud in certain spots. So let me check this. That should be pretty good. And let's go back here. And this is like his longest spot, so that should be pretty good. Reference point. So let's just go ahead and throw on that limiter. And then go back to monitoring it. So I know his is going to be pretty quiet. um, yeah, so just kind of news on the channel. We just hit 100 subscribers, which is amazing. Really exciting. So this is pretty quiet. So I do have the vanity URL, so you can go to youtube.com/c/Reaper for podcasting. And it'll take you directly to the channel. And then I built a website, which has some cool offerings, which I will get to in a minute. This needs quite a bit of boost. Congrats. Thanks so much. Yeah. So exciting. What I'm also going to do, help me out later, is go ahead and throw on a meter for each track. Because that'll be helpful. Because if it's like 1 or 2 tracks, like it's pretty easy to get them like balanced. But when you're looking at 4 tracks, it can get kind of tricky to know like if with like on the final tracks and when it's mixed down, it could be kind of tricky to figure out what's what. So I'm going to put one on each one. So when I do my final render, I can monitor each track separately to see what the loudness is. And before I forget, I need to add a limiter onto my master track to handle the crossbleed or crosstalk. Okay. Yes, I made a website. Still a work in progress. I'm going to change up the homepage. Right now, it's just like a list of all the videos that are currently on the YouTube channel, which is a bit redundant, but I'm going to do a little bit more. But it's got an About Me section, way to get in touch with me. All the videos are organized. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff. So his range is probably going to be a little bit more because there is kind of long silences in here. But the volume's looking pretty good, the loudness, so we're going to call that one good enough. Switch to myself. Looks like my loudest section's right here. And I try to get more than just, because I used to do like just that peak and just keep going there, but I found that it's not very accurate and you need to take into account the audio around it. Do you ever use the loudness extension to find the true peaks? I do not. And this is one thing I'm going to have to be honest about. Like I said before, like I'm not an engineer. I'm not super knowledgeable on the tech side of things. Like I'm all self-taught. And so I don't fully comprehend like the true peaks. So that's something I need to learn more about. But to answer your question, no, I don't. The loudness extension, is that in SWS? So surprisingly, I'm not very dynamic in this episode. Usually I'm quite dynamic. I have the habit of starting my sentence really loudly and then just kind of trailing off at the end. I'm sure you've probably noticed. Um, it works well, but you have to re-render if you make any changes to the volume. Interesting. All right, so I'm going to bring this up. Let that run. And then right under the extensions menu. So extensions, loudness. So I've looked at this. And can't you like analyze? And does it take into account effects? So actually, let me cancel this. And I'll analyze Brian's and see what that comes up with. So I've looked at this, but never really used it too much. So I'm familiar with them. Also, I used to use the loudness. The way I used to do loudness is I would add my compression and everything, and then bounce the track. So like render to new stem or render stems, whatever it is, and then I'd run the SWS loudness normalization. Okay, so this actually could be really useful. It's pre-effects as well, so limited. Oh, okay. So what I would need to do would then be come over here, render to render tracks to mono stem tracks, and then run the analysis. Okay. Yeah, so not very useful in this situation. Um, but do you use it often, David? Because sometimes I'll use the analysis in RX a little bit. Probably should have normalized. I know a lot of people say they don't understand like why people normalize, but to me it's a little bit easier. I don't have to like go crazy with my sliders. I usually run it first thing, find the true peak, then knock a dB or two off just so that my compression is more effective because it's not dealing with a really peaky section. Okay. If you wanted to make a video on doing that and like post it in the Facebook group, I would love to watch that. So if I do that here, analyze this item, let that do its thing. My cat's being so obnoxious right now. She wants in the office, but I know she's going to be a huge distraction and get in the way. I don't have to deal with that. I'm hoping she calms down a little bit. All right, so mine's looking pretty good. It's probably a little too much compression. Let me turn that down. Kick this up a notch and then call that good enough. back a writer. And also add in the WLM, just so I don't forget later. All right, so true peak of infinity. So is that because, like, right here she's getting to like the very super loud? So then you would like bring this down a little bit? All right, so Jennifer is very dynamic in this one, so I'll actually be able to do something with this. Okay. Let's find a good section right here. Looks pretty good. Through on the ships. Yeah, that's not really a helpful result. It usually finds a true peak with the value, and clicking that section takes you to it. Interesting. I'm going to have to look into that. And yeah, like I said, if you want to like make a quick video, or if you want to hop on like a Zoom call or something, and you can show that to me, that would be pretty cool because that sounds really interesting. So just taking a look at her audio, I can already tell it's probably going to need another compressor. So let me just go ahead and throw on my 2500. I don't know why, I just like using different compressors. And I know there's like a whole thing, cause like Sheps can act like multiple types of compressor. I can't remember how, but you like change. Oh yeah, it's VCA versus VET or optical. Whereas I think this is just VCA. And I was listening to an episode of Clean Cut Audio, which if you don't listen to that show, I highly recommend it. Oh, what I can also do is actually turn up this ratio because she is so dynamic in this one. But Tom Kelly is so when you want something, if you want to learn more about the engineering side, Tom Kelly is the way to go. But he goes deep into compression. This actually might be one of his courses, but it's well worth it. But he goes into like the different types of compressors and how you can use compression to change the sound to get exactly what you want. I'll see if I can make a vid of my loudness process next time I do a fresh episode. Yes, please do. I would love to see that. And speaking of Tom Kelly, he's also currently working on a new course on EQ, and he's I saw him saying it was like right now it's like 6 hours long or something. It's like insane. Excuse me. But if you are wanting to like learn more about the science behind audio, um, that's the way to go. Like I knows this stuff. And he's also got a YouTube channel, so it's Clean Cut Audio on YouTube. So definitely check him out. He does use Pro Tools. So as far as like using a DAW, it's not gonna be useful. But the what he teaches, my goodness, this is weird. But what he teaches is DAW agnostic. So you can take the techniques that he teaches in his videos and in his podcast and apply it to what you do in Reaper. So that is considerable dynamic range. So I'm going to turn up the ratio on to 2500. It's pretty quiet, so I'm going to turn up the output a little bit. Okay, so hers is going to be kind of tricky. Let's see if I can find this section. So this is a nice long section with dynamics. Let's just see how this turns out. And because of like the nature of things with 4 tracks, there's a lot of silence. So I think a lot of this is going to have to be done after the fact. So that's pretty loud there. Yeah, so this initial pass is just trying to get a good idea of where we're at, and then I'll probably fine tune it at the end. So we've been going for 20 minutes, and we haven't even started editing. Okay, let's knock that down a little bit, and then we're just going to call it there. So now I'm going to demonstrate one of my favorite tools. Don't forget to turn this off. So Riley from Podigy posted in the Facebook group a very long time ago. So what we're going to do is, it's really difficult to try to line up audio and mess with this 4 tracks because you can't move like small sections. So the first thing we're going to do is, and I have a custom action that goes through this process. So the first thing is going to be the auto trim split items. And this is probably going to take a little while. So we'll just let that do its thing. And another announcement I had for hitting 100 subscribers on YouTube. So obviously we have the website. And here you can watch the videos, add to, watch later, kind of a little bit easier, maybe easier, I don't know, it's just another way of doing it. Has information about me, all my videos, you can watch. The live stream on this as well. We can also book a private lesson. So I know a lot of people find these videos really helpful. But if you are looking for like one-on-one learning experience, if that's how you learn best, you can book an hour of my time, and I will gladly help you through either, if you're struggling with, so I'm sorry if you heard that, if you're struggling with a specific technique or something, or if you want to actually learn Reaper from scratch, we can go and do all that. Or if you just want to hang out for an hour, that's always an option. But I don't recommend doing it that way because that's wouldn't be worth your money. Yeah, so you can definitely do that. I'm also going to be doing Q&As. So if you want to like go live with me in the Facebook group, and I can work with you on some technique, or I can show you how to do something, or just have like a little powwow session or a little session in the Facebook group. That's something that I'm going to be starting up pretty soon. So if you do have any questions or want me to cover anything, feel free to send me a message, either like here on this stream. On the website, there's a contact form. So Reaper, wow, it only did that 1 track. Okay. So we'll leave that. We'll select the other 3 and do the same thing. So yeah, go on the website, reaperforpodcasting.com, and there's a contact form, or reach out to me on Facebook, whatever. Send me your questions, and I'll do like a live Q&A type thing sometime in the future. My cat is persistent. All right, so at this point, probably go get a cup of tea or make some coffee or something, because this is probably going to take a little bit. Excuse me. But if you're not familiar, what it's doing now is analyzing all 3 tracks, and it's looking for, so the threshold is minus 21 dB. So anything that goes below that, it'll detect and delete. hysteresis, I think is how it's pronounced. So if you notice, like when you kind of trail up at the end, um, that will catch that, so that way it's not cut off immediately. This will ignore silence shorter than 200 milliseconds. So if it's like a quick pause, like right here, it'll leave that alone. Um, Make non-silent clips no shorter than 200 seconds or 200 milliseconds. So make sure it's like you don't have too many of these. I could probably actually increase that to make that go away. Leading pad and trailing pad, I think is like how far in front. So it's kind of hard to see because where my cursor is, but there's like a little space right before the audio kicks in, and a little space after it. And then the mode is split and remove silent areas. So it'll go through and split all this up, as you can see, and remove those big pieces of silence. And then I also make sure to check run signal through track FX for detection. What that does, so unlike what David was saying with the loudness thing that it does at pre-effects, by turning this on, it does post-effects. So if you have, like right here, it's pretty quiet, that might, or even over here, that might have issues getting this being caught as being loud enough to be kept. But I run it through effects that goes through my compression and volume boosting. So that makes sure that everything's loud enough so that if it does need to stay, it will be detected and not cut. So it's going to go through all that, and what we're going to be left with is 4 tracks that look like this. And that's a lot easier when you're doing multi-tracks. It's a lot easier, or even single tracks, depending on who you're editing. Because if you were in the podcast editors club when I did the edit with me on April 13th, the client that I did the episode for, she takes like really long, like 10-second pauses as she tries to gather her thoughts and figure out how she wants to say what she's going to say. And so I think that episode was like 45 minutes long, and it cut out like 13 minutes of just dead air. So even on certain solo episodes, it's super useful. But in multi-track episodes, it's really useful because now I can just work with these individual items rather than having to, cut them manually in order to manipulate them. So auto trim split is fantastic. And I'm also going to show you the thing that Riley promoted or kind of posted about in the Facebook group, which is a way to, paired with the auto trim split, it truncates silence. So it's going to take all these little bits. So where there's like too much silence in between 2 items, it'll shore them all together. So that way it'll cut out a bunch of dead air. So as soon as this auto trim split finishes, I will show you how that works. But it's going to take a minute. So if you're watching, feel free to say hi in the chat. We're over on YouTube. Or if you want to let me know what you're working on, I will love to hear it. I know Dave was talking about his podcast of going minute by minute per episode of a movie. What movie are you doing? If you don't mind me asking. If you have to let us know what you're working on. This is just kind of the awkwardness as I'm trying to kill dead air while I wait for Reaper to do his thing. So please help me out. I'm not good at this whole vamping and just kind of talking randomly. I don't know what else I can talk about. I guess I can talk about what videos I have planned. And if you want to give me ideas or let me know what's important to you. So I know a couple of times I've talked about consolidate undo when you're creating a custom action. So I was going to make like a quick video on that. So it's kind of a standalone thing. Oh, I did the video on templates. I might have actually recorded that. Or no, so I'm planning on doing templates. Honestly, I can't remember if I recorded it or not. So that's coming soon. Recording a single USB, which is pretty basic, but it's going to be part of like the Reaper 101 series for people learning Reaper from the beginning. Multi-track with an audio interface, some more recording. Oh, and plugins and hardware that I like. Because Talib Alexander had asked about that, so I have a list of, um, both, excuse me, both free and paid plugins that I want to go over, the ones that I use, and a couple that, at least one that's on my wish list. Um, so David's working on Edge of Tomorrow. There's a movie that he's reviewing. Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt time looping movie. Okay, so now I need to watch this movie because that's I feel like I've heard of Edge of Tomorrow, um, but time loop. Okay, like time looping movies, like really kind of like it's a mind fuck, trying to like keep things in order. I think Looper was another one that played. I like video games and movies that really play with time very well. Um, yeah, that's really cool. So now I need to watch that movie, and then once I watch the movie, follow along in your podcast so I can get your in-depth analysis on it. Excuse me. Um, so I've recorded dealing with bad breath, which that one just went up this past Monday or Tuesday. Um, and then RX Connect. So in Adobe Audition, it's called RX Connect, which that's where um, you can connect RX to Adobe Audition. In Reaper, you can just use an external editor. And I don't know how it's done in Adobe Audition, so I don't know how similar it is. But I got that one coming out. And then. Okay, so no. The next one. So I did Project Templates will be coming out next. And then RX Connect after that. So RX Connect sometime next week, and hopefully Project Templates sometime this weekend. Yeah, so that's what's coming up the pipeline. And okay, cool. I filled the time from 2014. It's often called Live, Die, Repeat. So the same movie has two different titles. Is that what I'm reading? Um, Interesting. Okay, so part of the chain or like the command custom action is automatically this multiply gaps by percents. However, since because of the hiccup that it only did the one track, so all these are not selected. So I'm actually not going to do that right now. Instead, I'm going to Control A, just select all the items, and then do this. And so you can do the percent. I think Riley does like -1 or something, so it kind of overlaps and does a crossfade. I don't do that, so I leave it at 0, so it just kind of brings it right up to it. So click OK. So actually, I will show you how it works. So I jump to the end. So it's currently sitting at 56:01. So when I do this, 53:49. So over 2 minutes of dead air immediately gone. So not huge in this one. But like in my other client who takes these long pauses, it's cutting out 10 to 15 minutes. And that's 10 to 15 minutes that you don't have to listen to. Live, Die, Repeat was the tagline, but it's better than the actual title. So it's printed bigger on the DVD cover, so some people think that's the actual title of the movie. Oh, okay. Yeah. Because Edge of Tomorrow seems like a generic. Um, it's like. So the movie I was thinking of was like Day After Tomorrow. Or I think there's like a World of Tomorrow or something. So yeah, Live, Die, Repeat is much better. But okay, so I'm going to add that to my watch list. My wife is out of town this weekend, so I don't have to worry about finding something she'd enjoy. Because I don't think she'd like that movie, but I'm definitely going to check it out. Okay, so we are almost an hour into this stream, and now we can start editing. I understand if you don't want to hang out the entire time because this is going to take a while. I really didn't want to do such a long episode, but unfortunately, this is just something that needs to get done, so I can't be super picky about it. So anyway, let's get going.
And we're live here on the Podcast Editor Mastermind Show. Thank you all for joining us, those of you who are watching the live stream and those of you who are tuning in to the podcast. I'm Jennifer Longworth of Bourbon Barrel Podcasting, and below me is
Brian Ensminger of Top Tier Audio, and beside me is
Daniel Abendroth of Roth Media. Daniel Abendroth of. So sometimes the auto trim can be a little strict when it comes to breasts, so I might need to adjust that a little bit. Daniel Abendroth of Roth Media.
And above Daniel is our special guest for today, Lauren Wrighton. She's a podcast strategist and producer who helps female business coaches launch and grow a podcast that make an impact on their audience and businesses. She also uses her expertise in podcast production to teach freelancers how to become podcast managers and develop their own clientele. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Thank you so much. I'm excited. Thank you so much. I'm excited. Thank you so much.
Show, Lauren.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
And let me know how the volume is. So I just want to make sure that like my mic volume is comparable to what I'm editing. So it's not like, to adjust your volume every time I speak.
Guys.
So you're a podcast manager. In your own words, what does that mean?
Yes, great question. Yes, great.
What does that mean?
Yes, great question. That's the $1 billion question of this live and of this podcast episode. So I'm a podcast manager, and that means that I help people manage their podcasts. And to dive more into it, it means I will edit, upload, schedule, write the show description, write show notes, edit, upload, schedule, write the show description, write show notes, help them with their promotion on social media, help them land guests. So really manage all the tasks that we all know podcast takes to get it out the door each week. To get it out the door each week. That's what a podcast manager does.
So you do all of that. Do you manage other people or do you do it all yourself?
Do I have anyone on my team? Is that what you mean? Yeah. So I have people on my team through my core. You mean? Yeah. So I have people on. You mean? Yeah. So I have people on my team. You mean? Yeah. So. You mean? Yeah. So I have people. So I have people on my team through my course, but as far as me managing my clients, I do all of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. How long have you been doing that?
So all of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All of it.
Very cool. How long have you been doing that?
So
how long have you been doing that?
Do all of it.
How long have you been doing that?
All of it.
How long have you been doing that?
All of it.
How long have you been doing that?
So I've been doing this since. So I've been doing this. So I've been doing.
Volume matching is pretty good. Okay, cool.
Doing this since 2018. Started editing podcasts in 2017, but started being a podcast manager and really started my business fully in 2018.
Perfect. About how many clients are you serving right now?
So right now I have two. So right now I have two clients, which is an amazing low number for me. But it's really because I'm focusing. But it's really because I'm focusing more on my. But it's really because I'm focusing more on my course now. But I've had maybe 20 clients. But I've had maybe 20 clients in the course of my career doing this. At the most, I work part-time, by the way. So at the most I had like 7 clients, which was a lot because it was like 21 hours packed of work. So 7 is my all-time high at one time. And 2 is just a lot because it was like 21 hours packed of work. So 7 is my work. So 7 is my all-time high at one time. And 2 is just so sweet.
So I'm kind of in awe right now because I knew when you talked about what you did, because I took the course, right? And I didn't realize you were literally doing all of the things. And when I think about the prospect of taking the client load that I have and saying, okay, now I'm not just going to edit. I'm also going to help you book guests. And I'm assuming there's some content strategy going on with that as well.
Right.
And then you've got all that stuff. Like, how in the world do you even think about getting all that done without losing your mind?
Well, yeah, great question. And I think you have to remember, like we were talking about before we went live about how I'm scared for my kids to turn into teenagers. And it's the same type of thing that like, you don't start with everything. You don't start like starting from the top of managing guests and doing all of it. So managing guests and doing all of it. So when I first started, I was just editing, and then I was uploading and scheduling and writing descriptions, and then I was writing show notes. And the guest management piece, which you really are involved in the person's business at that point, that came last in my kind of development. So yeah, it's so yeah, I guess that's the way. Is how do I keep it all together? It's like I find it to be easier to do all of those things once I'm inside of someone's business and someone's podcast. It makes sense. I know them so well. So yeah, and also I only work on one client at a time, so I'm not managing everyone at all over the place. It's all over the place. Everyone at all over the place. It's really focused work.
I'm sorry,
Work.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping right into the weeds, but the first question that pops into my head is, okay, you manage them one at a time. How do you do that? Is it like a time block or
Yeah.
one-on-one? Like,
Mhm.
I can't even wrap my head around it.
Well, yeah. So my desired work hours, I work part time as I said, and I started working only from 7 p to 10 p. Because I was also wanting to be a stay at home mom. I was kind of doing 10 p. Because I was also 10 p. Because I was also wanting to be a stay 10 p. Because I was also wanting to be a stay at home mom. I was kind of doing both at the same time. So I would literally just do one client at a time, and that's why I could only do 7. Is because I only had 7 days in a week. And I would get 99% of that. And I would get 99% of that.
Had to run. I'll probably catch up on the replay later. Thanks for doing this. Hey, thanks so much for hanging out. I really appreciate it.
In a week, I would get 99% of that.
Yeah, and as soon as this is done, it's going to be available for replay. So just remember, you're about an hour into it, so you can start there whenever you go back to rewatch it or watch the rest of it.
In a week.
But thanks so much for hanging out and for chatting. Really appreciate it.
Week, I would get 99% of that done in the week. I would get 99% of that done in the 3 hours. I knew how long stuff would take me. So yeah, I would focus on one client a night. And so I was somewhat communicating with people during the day a night. And so I was somewhat communicating with people during the day. But as we know, like what a podcast is such, but as we know, like what a podcast is such a machine that once you get it up and running, you need to make tweaks, but you need to make tweaks running. You need to make tweaks, but I wanted to make it as smooth on my clients as well. So we just really tried to focus on streamlining so that we didn't have a lot of like back and forth. And it was like, okay, it's Tuesday night. I'm going to do Brian's episode now, and everything was there. And if it wasn't, somebody was going to be paying for it.
So how did this come about? So you kind of talk. So how did this come? So how did this come about? So you kind of talked about your progression from editing to now I'm doing this, this.
Mhm.
Was that something that you were conscious about from the beginning, or something you grew into, or was it kind of more based on like what your clients were looking for?
Yeah, it was definitely conscious. Yeah, it was definitely. Yeah, it was definitely. Yeah, it was definitely conscious because what happened was back in 2016, my friend and I back in 2016. Back in 2016, my friend and I started a podcast. So I guess I technically started editing in 2016. We just, we were the DIYers, hobby podcaster, just like, how do we make this happen? I don't honestly know how I made it. I don't like I launched it. I don't remember any of that stuff. But I was doing that. I was editing our show. But I was doing that. I was editing our show, and I was also became a mom that same year. And so I was like, that same year. And so I was like, how can I take this and make it into a part-time job? I knew I loved podcasting. I wanted to make it happen. So I got on Upwork and landed a client after so much effort. I don't know if any of you have been on Upwork, but it's a job board for anyone that's listening that isn't familiar. It was actually.
I got started on Fiverr.
Did you? Okay, so similar.
Yeah.
I think it was actually Elance back then. If we can take it back that same year. And so I was like, how can I take this and make it? It was actually.
I got started on Fiverr.
It was actually familiar.
I got started on Fiverr.
Did you? Okay. So familiar.
I got started on Fiverr.
Did you? Okay. Familiar.
I got started on Fiverr.
Did you? Okay, so similar.
Yeah.
I think it was actually Elance back then. If we can take it back a couple years. But yeah, in a couple years. So I started on Upwork, landed a client. Was just doing a couple years. So I started on Upwork, landed a client, was just doing editing, $30 an episode, painful. Mind you, I didn't know what I was doing. I have no background in this at all. I actually went to school for neurobiology and then got a full-time job in fitness. So audio production, no, not so. Audio production, no, not so much. So anyway, I that's how I got started. I was editing for this woman, doing a good job, but definitely taking forever. It was just taking me so long, and all of her episodes were different, and there was no end in sight. So I actually quit. I realized like this is just not worth it, and I can't figure this out, and like I'm gonna have to figure out something else. I had no community. Something else. I had no something else. I had no else. I had no community. Like I didn't know. I don't know if like who was doing this. And not. I mean, I know there was podcast editors, but I wasn't in community with anyone, so it was really difficult. But then I ended up meeting a virtual. But then I ended up meeting a virtual assistant coach a couple months like after I quit. I quit on this one client I had, and I found someone who was a virtual assistant coach, and she was like, "Oh, there's this whole virtual assistant world." So I did that, and then kind of brought together my podcast editing skills with my virtual assistant mindset, and that's when I was like, "Oh, I can make something happen with podcast management," and kind of took on it, and kind of took on that term as a podcast editor meets a VA.
Okay.
I'm
So when did
actually a
you
little
start?
bit interested in that epiphany that you
Mhm,
had,
mhm.
where you said, okay, VA world, podcast editor, kind of bring those together. Podcast editor, kind of bring those together. What did that epiphany look like? Like, how did you come across that idea and then go, okay, this is actually what I'm going to do? Like, how did you
Mhm.
walk through that process?
Yeah, so it was in yeah, so it was yeah, so it was in February of 2018. I started as a virtual assistant, and I still had the podcast with my friend this whole time. Podcast about fitness, and this virtual assistant coach that I met, I took her course to become a virtual assistant, and she was wanting to start. I took her course to become a virtual assistant, and she was wanting to start a podcast. And so I was a virtual assistant, and she's like, "Don't you have a podcast, right? Like, don't you edit?" And I was like, "Yeah, but like I tried it, and I just it wasn't working for me." And so I was really resistant to going back to podcast editing as a service. And she said, "Well, I want to start a podcast." And it was a couple months later after I'd met her, and she's like, "You're the person I know. Would you do this for me?" And I was like, "Well, yeah. Like, I love this. I just didn't think anyone would pay me for it." That was my mindset block around it. And so I launched her podcast, and that was when I launched hers, and I was still didn't know if I could. And that was when I launched hers, and I launched her podcast. I launched hers, and I was still didn't know if I could niche down and only be a podcast manager. But she told me to go for it, and it was pretty much. But she told me to go for it, and it was pretty much an experiment. But I landed six other clients within like 3 months of that time. I was like, okay, yeah, this is a thing. There's an opportunity here.
So when did you start calling yourself a podcast manager? And like, what was that shift?
Really from the start of deciding that I was going to go from virtual deciding that I was going to go from virtual assistant to podcast manager. I decided I was going to use this term podcast manager. And the reason was because the people that I was surrounded by, they were social media managers and Pinterest managers. And so it was like I wanted to be very clear. I wanted to be very clear as to what service I was providing, and I was providing the clear as to what service I was providing, and I was clear as to what service very clear as to what service I was providing, very clear as what service I was providing, very clear as to what service I was providing. Very clear as to what service I was providing, and I was providing the same type of thing a social media manager was providing, but for a podcast. So I was very intentional about using that term. Although, of course, a lot of people were like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "Oh, I will tell you." And I'm still getting that question today. And it's a well, I don't want to say I made it up because I'm sure I didn't. But people were like, "What does that really mean?" It's kind of intuitive, but people were like, "What does that really mean?" It's kind of because I'm sure I didn't. But people were like, "What does that really mean?" It's kind of intuitive, but it still begs a lot of questions.
Yeah, because I struggled. Yeah, because I. Yeah, because I. Yeah, because I struggled with like what to call myself because like I've always called myself an editor, but like I've been offering like uploading and scheduling and kind of the management aspect. I don't do show. Well, I outsource show notes. So I do offer it to my clients, but I don't do it myself. So I've been doing this for years now, but I've never figured out like what to call myself. Like podcast manager is just so like on the nose, like the perfect term.
Right. Yeah, it's broad enough too that Right. Yeah, it's broad enough too.
Term.
Right. Yeah, it's broad enough too that like when I listed the services earlier, not every podcast manager offers all of those, and not every podcast manager, like you said, they'll offer it, but they outsource it because we all have our strengths. And one thing people ask me a lot is like, well, how can you be good at all of those things? I'm like, well, most people aren't great at all of them. You know, I'm not gonna lie, we're not all good at graphic design and writing and editing and all of this, but you can get started as a podcast manager by doing a lot of them, and then find your way. Like, oh, I really love the editing, I really love the writing, I really love the whatever it is, and then outsource or just focus on what you love.
And you do guest booking as well?
Yeah.
I see that question come up in podcast forums on Facebook a lot about who books guests, how do you book guests? So do you have any, like, I don't know, tricks about booking guests?
Yeah, I think it sounds more intimidating. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's yeah. Yeah, I think it sounds more intimidating than it needs to be. I think that's one of people's holdups is that they think like, "Oh, then I'm gonna be responsible for like what if I can't land anyone or what if I like those kind of things pop up." But what I think it's really but what I think it's really an organic service add-on when you have been working with someone and you know their audience really well and you have a really good feel for their show. You know, like, oh, they should have this person on. And also, if you're working with the same type of people, like you're working with authors or you're working with parenting coaches or something, then you yourself are in that space and you know the players, you know like who's know the players, you know
Don't like that plosive. Let's see if I can get rid of it.
the players, you know like know the players, know the players, like know the players, know the players, like who's coming out with a book and like you already have your thumb on who could be a great guest. You yourself are in that space and you know the players, like who's
Much
coming out with a
better.
book and like you already have your thumb on who could be a great guest. So that's why I find it to be pretty organic as an add-on. But as far as like organic as an add-on, as an add-on, but as far organic as an add-on, but as far organic as an add-on. But as far as like tips on your question was basically like tips on actually landing client or landing guests. Is that what you
Well,
asked?
what I'm hearing is that it's relationship based, and if you have the strong
Always.
relationship with your client, you're going to naturally discover guests for them in the relationships. But that's
Mhm.
kind of what I'm hearing.
For sure.
So, what type of
That-
skills does it take to be a
Yeah.
podcast manager?
Yeah.
Main,
So I think you
main.
so I think I think you really it's best if you I think you really it's best if you have like the project manager personality. I think you really it's best really it's best if you have like it's best if you have like the project manager personality. So you like to manage things. There is some babysitting your client involved, which as editors, you're already doing that. So there's ultimately, I think one of the great things that a podcast manager brings to the table is that they're the person that makes sure everything is ready. So your client is no longer the person that says, is everything ready for the podcast that's going live tomorrow or whatever that is.
Mm.
You become that person. And that's one of the huge value pieces that you bring to the table. But that also means that you have to be the type of person that can manage the details. So there's some definitely details. So there's some definitely detail oriented, but also some top level thinking that has to be involved. And I find, someone that takes initiative thrives in this position because they can expand their role with a client. And I find, someone that takes initiative thrives in this position because they can expand their role with a client just because they're one to take initiative, like with the guests. They bring their clients guests even though they're not contracted to do so. And then the client's like, oh well, shoot, this is amazing. I would love for you to do this for me, on a more consistent basis. So initiative, majority of the time a podcast manager will edit. So initiative majority of the time a podcast manager will edit, so editing skills are key. Sometimes like people in my course, some of them do not edit and they really want to be that project manager, and so they outsource the editing to an editor. So I would say the management personality is most key for most of the managers that I know.
So I'd like to kind of key off of that, right? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now. They're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control or, some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you, because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at if you were going, okay, this person might have what it takes or might not?
I would say, I guess,
to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show, because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control or, some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you, because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now. They're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control or, some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you, because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now. They're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. are there some, we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control, or some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there some, we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership?
So I noticed that Brian was a lot quieter compared to Lauren. And so that's why I kind of pulled up the meter to see what it was like. And yeah, he was definitely pretty quiet. The range was a
They take a
little
leadership role
too
in somebody's
high
show
for
because
my
that,
liking. So I'm just going to throw in another compressor.
they take a leadership role in somebody's show because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control, or some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there some,
And
we've
that'll
talked about
give
some of the
me
personality traits, but
another,
are there things that they can look at in their
make it a
work
little bit
history
easier to,
that
because I
maybe
had
aren't
in
related to whether or
chefs, I
not they
was
take a
boosting
leadership
it
role
like
in somebody's show?
quite a
Because
bit.
that, as an editor, it
So
can feel
getting
really
this
weird
other
to start
compressor on there is
taking
going to
over
make that a
control,
little bit
or some
easier
part
to
of
get
control
it
over a
up
show
to
when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because
the correct
some of your clients
loudness.
will expect you to just fill that
So I was
role,
going to do
do it
that
really
real
well,
quick
and then
here
go on.
and
So
then get back
what would you look
to
at? Because
editing.
I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there some, we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work
Mid
history
too
that maybe
loud.
aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control, or some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to
Excuse
you.
me.
Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor.
Hey Daniel,
I don't
thanks
know
for doing
if
this.
I would
Have
be
to
a good
go now, but I will
podcast
watch the
manager.
rest when you
Are there
post it on
some,
YouTube.
we've talked
Best
about
of
some of the
luck with the
personality traits,
channel
but
and
are there
website.
things that they can look at in
Thanks
their work
so much,
history
Richard. I
that
really
maybe aren't
appreciate
related
that.
to whether or
And
not they
thank
take a
you
leadership role
for
in somebody's
hanging
show?
out.
Because that,
And
as an
thanks
editor,
for
it can feel
chatting.
really weird
It's been
to
a lot of
start
fun, and
taking
thank you
over
so
control,
much
or some part
for
of control over a show
joining
when
me.
it hasn't actually been given to you.
My
Because
plan
some
is to
of your
do
clients will expect you to
these
just fill
every
that
other
role,
week.
do it really well, and then go
So
on. So
just kind of
what would you
keep
look at?
an
Because
eye
I
out.
would assume that
And I
there's some
have
people
this
listening
in
right
the
now, they're
wrong
going, okay, I'm a
spot.
great editor. I don't know if
Yeah,
I
so
would be
keep
a
an eye
good
out to the channel.
podcast
And if you
manager.
haven't already
Are there
joined the
some,
Facebook
we've talked
group,
about some of the personality traits, but
a
are there
lot of
things that they
great
can look at
people
in their
in
work
there.
history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's
Just
show?
go to
Because
Reaper for
that,
podcasting slash
as an
group
editor,
and
it can
it'll
feel
take you
really
there.
weird
But
to
thank you
start
so much for
taking
hanging out,
over
and I
control,
will see
or some
you
part of control over a show when it hasn't
next
actually
time.
been
I'll see
given
you
to you.
around.
Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there some, we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control, or some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there some, we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control, or some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there some,
Sometimes it can be a
we've
real
talked
pain
about some
in
of the
the ass
personality
trying
traits,
to
but
get the
are there things that they
loudness
can look at
right.
in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control, or some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great editor. I don't know if I would be a good podcast manager. Are there some, we've talked about some of the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't related to whether or not they take a leadership role in somebody's show? Because that, as an editor, it can feel really weird to start taking over control, or some part of control over a show when it hasn't actually been given to you. Because some of your clients will expect you to just fill that role, do it really well, and then go on. So what would you look at? Because I would assume that there's some people listening right now, they're going, okay, I'm a great
All
editor.
right, so I think
I
that's
don't
pretty
know
good.
if I would be a good
So
podcast
let's
manager. Are there some,
continue
we've talked about some of
on.
the personality traits, but are there things that they can look at in their work history that maybe aren't look at if you were going, okay, this person might have what it takes or might not?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, I guess, a desire to be more involved. Like some of the editors that I've spoken with, they love the fact that they get to work. You probably will work on more shows as an editor than you would as a podcast manager because the role is bigger. So if you love working with 10 plus whatever clients and you like just kind of like the one and done type of relationship, then you might done type of relationship, then you might be best as an editor. If you want to get in and help the person grow, if you're kind of want to kind of invest in people a little bit deeper, then that would be a good sign. That podcast manager, that good sign that podcast management might be a better fit. Something you said though, Something that you said,
I need to get a cough button.
something that you said though, I'm spacing it now. I don't know. Now, I don't know.
I was probably spacing it when I said it. So just
Yeah, no, it'll probably come back. But yeah. So I would say, and writing. People don't realize that like podcast management has a lot of writing involved, and you can outsource it, but it's more difficult to outsource in my opinion. So you don't have to be great at like graphics. People can help you with graphics, but writing, if you enjoy writing show descriptions, if you enjoy like pulling out stuff that's from the episode for show notes and stuff, then I think that could also be a key. That hey, this is something people are really looking for. So if you enjoy doing it, then podcast management might be the place for you as well.
if I can then just kind of take that one selfishly, take that one further. So let's say, for example, that I have
For you as well.
if I can then just kind of take that one selfishly, take that one further. So let's say, for example, that I have a show that I currently edit, and the host doesn't really like writing the title and the description, and I think about approaching that as an add-on. How would I think about pricing that in relationship to the work that I'm already doing? Because you could make the case that it shouldn't be a 1-for-1. If it takes me 2 hours to edit an episode, it shouldn't also take 2 hours to write the episode notes. But it's also not like 10 minutes and done, right? There's a lot of focus that goes into that. How would you recommend somebody approach pricing that as an add-on?
Yeah. And you reminded me of my question of going from being in this editor relationship with someone to then being in a like a podcast management relationship. It is different. So I can answer that at the end of this. But if you thought in your head like, okay, I want to add on like one service, or I'm going to try out writing these descriptions for this client, what I would do personally is I would say, hey, I'm now offering these additional services, whatever it is that you potentially wanted to do. But I would try to do more than one. And you could say, are you interested in adding on these services? And if they say, hey, yeah, let's do show description and uploading, that's something everyone wants to get off their plate. Then I would say you would want to completely change the way that you're presenting. I would say you would want to completely change the way their plate. Then I would say you would want to completely change the way that you're presenting. Say you would want to completely change.
A little bit of a plosive there. So let me throw that on.
You would want to completely change. You would want to completely change the way
RX is amazing.
their plate.
Holy
Then
crap.
I would say you would want to completely change the way that you're presenting your pricing to them. So if you have like a per episode editing, or I'm not sure if you want to let me know how you do it, or I'm not sure if you want to let me know how you do it, but I would then put it into a package and say like, this is your podcast management package now, because then they're not seeing like, oh, well, he's charging me $50 to write an episode or to write a description. That's not really worth it. $50 to write an episode or to write a description. That's not really worth dollars to write an episode or description. Me $50 to write a description. That's not really worth it. Me $50 to write a description. That's not really me $50 to write a description. Me $50 to write an episode or to write a description. That's seeing like, oh, well, he's charging me $50 to write an episode or to write an episode. To write an episode. Charging me $50 episode or to write a description. Dollars to write a description. Charging me $50 to write a description. That's not charging me $50 to write a description. That's not really worth it. They're not seeing that kind of exchange. Instead, they're seeing he's doing all of these things for this price, and that's worth it. There's a mentality switch that happens. So I would say like, oh, it's gonna be, I wouldn't. So I would say like, oh, I wouldn't say it's gonna be $50 extra for me to write the description. They'll probably be like, meh, that's okay. If you say, okay, hey, this is what it would look like for me to do all these things, then it's presented differently.
Sure. I guess I was thinking like internally, how do I think about pricing? I would definitely
Okay,
approach it as
gotcha,
a package, right? And go,
gotcha.
okay, if this is what you want, this will be the new price. That totally makes sense. You remembered something, so I want to make sure I leave
Yes.
space for you to.
Yes, I was going to say, if you're in the position where you're thinking, okay, I am an editor, and how do I pivot into a podcast manager with clients? I think that can be tough, to be honest. I think sometimes you have to leave behind some clients that know you for that one thing in order to kind of go into something else. So you were saying like, how do you you're just in this very comfortable spot with them. You're their editor. I've tried to pivot into like I've tried to pivot into editor. I've tried to pivot into like one of my first clients. I have like 4 first clients in my head. So excuse me, I say first client, it's like 5 different people. but yeah, one of my first clients I just edited for, and it was at a low rate, and I tried to move into podcast management, and she didn't see my value. And I was like, well, how do you it's tough to like take someone from, $30 an episode to 100. They're like, wait, what? When did this girl learn anything or whatever? So I think sometimes it can be tough. You have to kind of more utilize what you've learned in the testimonial, more utilize what you've learned in the testimonials, more more utilize what you've learned and the testimonials you've gotten from those editing clients, and instead kind of get into new clients as a podcast manager.
I like that. And I am being a little bit selfish in asking this because I do have a client that's already asked me about this kind of thing. So I know that there's an interest. I just don't know how to approach the pricing. And frankly, as a person who works full time and also edits, it's a little bit challenging to go, okay, what is this time worth to me that I think that they would be willing to pay? Because, to write the episode notes and the description, that could be another hour for every episode.
Right.
Theoretically, right? I don't know.
Yeah. When you say episode notes, do you mean like a short description, or do you mean
like
show
a
notes?
blog, like
Right.
the blog post that
Yeah.
would go with it? So
Yeah.
probably something less than 1,000 words, but more
Yeah.
than 300.
Yeah. And that
Post that
Yeah.
would go with it. So
Yeah.
probably something less than 1,000 words, but more
Yeah.
than 300.
Yeah, and that does usually take me like an hour. When I think of editing, I usually like budget an hour-ish to do like writing the episode description and show notes and uploading on all of that. So yeah, you're right. And you've gotten a system together because you've been editing for a while. And so what's that time to you? And maybe you put out the number that feels right to you. And if they say no, you're like, okay, that's to you. And if they don't, and if it feels right to you, and if they say no, you're like, okay, that's what would feel best for me right now. But I think too,
More than 300.
yeah, and that does usually take me like an hour. When I think of editing, I usually like budget an hour-ish to do like writing the episode description and show notes and uploading on all of that. So yeah, you're right. Like writing the episode description to do like writing the episode description and show notes and uploading on all of that. So yeah, you're right. And you've gotten a system together because you've been editing for a while. And so what's that time to you? And maybe you for a while, what's that time to you? And maybe you put out the number for a while. And so what's that time to you? And maybe you put out the number that feels right to you. And if they say no, you're like, okay, that's what would feel best for me. That's what would feel best. Like, okay, that's what would feel best for me right now. But I think too, if you're giving someone a price for like just like a show description and uploading, that's more of like a convenience to them. The price isn't like that high because it's not that much. If you're doing show notes and like social media graphics, then it's a bigger package. But if you're just adding on something small, it's more of like you're testing to see if you want to go further with this client. Does that make sense? Further with this client? Does that further with this client? You want to go further with this client? Want to go further with this client. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. I'm going to stop talking because I've been talking too much.
Well, one of our questions had been if.
I think so. I'm going to stop talking because I've been talking too much. I think so.
Well, one of our questions.
I think so.
Well, one of our questions had been if you're a podcast editor, what's the next logical step towards becoming a podcast manager? And I've heard you say many times it's show descriptions and uploading.
Mm-hmm.
That just keeps coming back around to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be your? That just keeps coming back around to what you're saying. Show descriptions and uploading. That just keeps coming back around to what you're saying. Would that be your next logical service to provide?
Yeah. I would say that. And if you really just want to take like a half step, I would say description and uploading. But then I would say if you want to take a full step, it would be show notes, and then with those two, and then possibly like social media, and then with those two, and then possibly like social show notes, and then with show notes with those two, and then possibly like social media graphics, because the way I see social media graphics is like updating social media graphics and like pulling clips so that you're creating audiograms. You're likely not creating like brand new graphics, so you don't need to have a ton of like additional experience creating graphics. You can just edit their graphics that they already have, and you're already editing, so you're already in the audio, so you pull clips. It's convenient, very convenient for them, because if they are doing audiograms, that means they're paying someone to listen to them, because if they are doing audiograms, that means they're doing audiograms, that means they're paying doing audiograms, because if they are doing audiograms, that means they're.
Do you do SFX? I do not. I guess sometimes I do. I have one client, and sometimes she'll do interviews, and I'll use like a whoosh sound effect to transition from like the pre-roll of like her setting it up to like the actual interview. And I have one client who does like different segments, so I'll have like different transition pieces between those. But for the most part, I don't do any kind of sound effects.
Audiograms, that means they're paying someone to listen. Convenient for them, because if they are doing audiograms, that means they're paying. Convenient for them, because if they are doing audiograms, that means they're paying someone to listen to the show and pull out clips to create audiograms. And so when you say, oh, actually, I can do all of that, number of clips to create audiograms. And pull out clips to create audiograms. And so when you say, oh, actually, I can do all of that, number one, in their mind, it's so much cleaner. So they're willing to pay for that. So they're willing to pay for that. But it's also but it's also can be kind of a smooth system for you as well.
Are there things that you've ever considered?
Well,
Are there things that you've ever considered offering to your clients that have turned out to be non-value added in
mm,
terms of like they're like, yeah, it sounds great, but no,
yes.
don't care.
Yes, I do have something. So I was trying to really raise my prices at one point. I was like, I grew my business, and then I was like, okay, I need to raise my prices. And I was kind of going into the second phase of my business. This was maybe back in 2019. And so I decided that I was going to start offering strategy, like the podcast strategy, that's a thing. And so I started on like discovery thing. And so I started on like discovery calls. I was chatting with potential clients, and I would tell them like, oh, well, I am very strategic in everything I do. And
Okay, cool. I'm looking for sound effects. Yeah, the only ones I really use. Nice knowing you. Take care. All right. Have a good one.
I just was like strategy. And I remember one really blunt, people were saying no, by the way. And one really blunt person I talked to, appreciate this woman very much because it was a huge light bulb moment for me. She was like, well, she was like, she was like, well, she was like, I'm a 7-figure business owner or whatever, fill in the blank. And I have a business coach. Why would I hire you for strategy? And I was like, oh, okay, good point. And so what I realized was good point. And so what I realized was I just needed to raise my prices. I didn't need to have a new term, or I didn't need to over explain what I was doing. I didn't need to add fancy words. I just needed to raise my prices. And I actually went to a conference, and I actually went to a conference and heard something, and it all clicked together. And so I just raised my prices, and I don't overkill on the strategy anymore.
That's huge. I remember we talking to Brittany Felix, and that was kind of like her thing. It's like, you don't need to justify that your rates are going up. They're just going up.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, the longer we work with clients, the more experience we have. We know it works. And so it's just experience. If you have to have a reason, it's experience.
Yeah. So what are some pitfalls as far as like podcast management? Because you're taking on a lot more responsibility, taking on more on your plate. So what are some like pitfalls that you've run into, and like that we should look out for those that are looking to get into this?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I would say.
So what are some like pitfalls that you've run into, and like that we should look out for those that are looking to get into this?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
So what are some like pitfalls that you've run into, and like that we should look out for those that are looking to get into this?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say.
What are your nightmare stories?
Yeah, I would say client boundaries, because you're opening the door for you to take on all of these like small, minor perhaps things that they want. But then it's like if they ask you, oh, hey, can you start thinking of a Facebook Live topic for me based on my podcast episode? They're like, oh, sure, And so you just add that on, and then it's like 5-10 more things that they've added. You have to be so clear on when they've crossed the line, when you need to raise the price. And so I love like when people give me words to use for my clients, like, tell me what to say. I need to know what to say. So what I tell people is like, when you can add some stuff on, because if your rate is high enough, you're like, yeah, I can do that. That sounds great. That's very organic for me to do. But if once it's like, no, I need to raise the price, you can say like, oh, I'd be happy to do that. I will send you an updated invoice, or I'll send you an updated proposal. And then if that looks good, then I'll send you like a new invoice and contract, because then it signals to them like, okay, this is a different price. This is a different package. Some clients, they don't realize that like, oh, is this included? Is it not? That's not really their responsibility to like keep track of like everything that you're doing for them necessarily. So you need to remind them, hey, this is the boundary. And we probably can talk about client boundaries this entire time, but this is the boundary, and I'm happy to do this, and it's going to be a different price, and I'll let you know what that is in your email.
I'm taking notes because that Facebook Live topic sounds like a great possibility to add. To go, okay, when I listen to your episode, I'm already pulling a clip. I'll also send you 1 or 2 topics that you could talk about, and that then becomes part of the package that actually you're not really delivering, right? Because they still have to deliver the live. But
yeah.
You're providing them the idea.
Yeah. Or here's an even a newer one that I'm testing out for my show is I'm having my podcast manager think of, or just pull out that I'm testing out for my show. I'm having my podcast manager think of, or just pull out like a tip or two from the show. And it might not be a tip always. Like if it's a guest interview, it just might be like a golden nugget from every show. And I'm going to try to create a reel from them for Instagram. So I'm not sure exactly how it's going to go, because I'm not 100% great at reels, but that's my new thing that I'm testing.
Very cool.
Okay, let me write that down real quick.
Yeah, totally stealing your ideas right now.
Go for it.
Thanks for coming on.
But I think what this highlights is, so like whenever I started adding on services for my clients, but I think what this highlights is, so like whenever I start, it's a weird breath. But I think what this highlights is, might just take that all together. I don't understand what's going on. But I think what this highlights is, So like whenever I started adding on services for my clients, the strategy behind that is that I want to be indisposable. Like I want to be so valued to
Mm.
the process that the idea of like them finding someone cheaper or like moving on from me is so uncomfortable because like I'm so ingrained and so they see the value of what I bring. And just like all these little things are like great ways to take more of their place so that they can focus on whatever they're doing in their business or whatever. And it just makes you invaluable. And it just makes you invaluable to what they're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's like the opposite of T-Mobile.
And it just makes you invaluable to what they're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Highlights is so like whenever I started adding on services for my clients, the strategy behind that is that I want to be indisposable. Like I want to be so valued to the process that the idea of like them finding someone cheaper or like moving on from me is so uncomfortable because like I'm so ingrained and so they see the value of what I bring. And just like all these little things are like great ways to take more of their place so that they can focus on whatever they're doing in their business or whatever. And it just makes you invaluable to what they're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
It's like the opposite of T-Mobile, where you're waiting for the contract to run out so you can switch companies. Like, you actually want to stay with Daniel. I like that.
Yeah, because I mean, I hate to say this, but you can find cheap editors. Like
Yeah.
if you're just editing, like there's plenty of people, and as like our industry grows more and more, you're gonna find a lot. It's gonna be pretty saturated.
Mhm.
But if you can build that relationship and then just like ingrain yourself into again every little bit of the podcast, then it'll be really hard to find
Yeah.
somebody to replicate that.
Yeah. And I would say one way that and I would say one way that you have to think of creative ways to bring value to their show and to their business. And one key thing I think is being a true listener of their show. Like if you're going to actually listen to their show, even if you don't work with them, then that means that you are like I said earlier, you're following the other people that are in their industry. You're reading the books, maybe you're just in it. And so you can give them some great ideas just because it's like, oh, I know this space. When you don't know the
Mhm.
space, it's a lot more work because you're not just doing it in your spare time. You're not like scrolling through Instagram, basically working for them because you're following all the people that they follow and things like that.
So let's say I'm an editor and I am an editor, but I want to start adding these services, but I don't know how to do any of these things. So
Mhm.
where can people go to up-level their skills for
Well,
this?
I have a course. Do you want to hear about that, or do you want to hear about other
Yeah.
ways? Okay. I'm like,
Let's
this seems
do
like too
both.
easy of a
Yeah.
question. So yeah, I have a program where I teach that. So there's one way, a very easy way that you can do that. But I would say if that's not, if that's not your answer, then finding people, being in community with people that are doing this, and well, I guess two things. Ask people, hey, how are you doing this? How are you promoting your shows? How are you, doing this and that? But then also you can just see what's working in the podcasting industry. Like if you want to just add on episode descriptions, then look at how people are writing their descriptions. What's the most common
Mhm.
practice options? What's the most options? What's the most common
Mhm.
practices? Do you think that's working? So just doing some just education by researching podcasts, I think you can learn a ton from just doing that.
So where do we find this community you keep talking about?
Learn a ton from just doing that.
So where do we find this community you keep talking about?
Well, I mean, there's your guys's. Well, I mean, there's your. Well, I mean, there's your guys. Well, I mean, there's your guys' podcast editor community. I have a free Facebook group called the Podcast Manager Mastermind, and then there's other places on Facebook that I feel like these communities have just exploded over the last couple of years. I think there's a lot of great conversations happening in those Facebook groups, and people are just really willing to share what's working. I think there's some like tech talk where people try to like outdo each other. If you can get past that, then you can learn a lot.
Are you talking about me again?
I'm
Oh,
not
man.
calling anyone out on here, but that's my pet peeve is I'm like, I always think about the person that's just brand new and they're like, RX8, I can't do this. They're like, so I'm just like, hey, it's fine. You can do it. Stick around.
So we've talked a little bit about education. One of the things I'm wondering is, what do you wish that you would have known? What do you wish that you would have known before you got started?
That's a great question. Gosh. Well, part of me wishes I would not have started on Upwork. I wish I would have found clients through Facebook and things like that. But whatever, our experiences are experiences. I think I probably would have raised my prices sooner so that I could have kind of gone deeper with people and felt a little bit more ease. But I don't. Yeah. But because of that, I've worked on a lot of different kinds of shows. So I probably would I'd probably say the pricing piece. I definitely had my prices low for too long. So probably that.
I think a lot of
a lot of us.
people in our industry are guilty of that.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about how you find clients. It's a frequently asked question.
Good one.
Mhm.
Yeah, for our listeners and in Facebook groups, like, oh, I need clients. How do I find them? So how do you find clients?
Yes, I love this question. Well, I would first say, who do you want to work with? And if your answer is anyone that will pay me, then I would say, let's think a little harder. Let's take it back a step. Let's think about somebody that you really want to work with, because the easy answer is like, oh, Facebook groups, like that's like the first place that people find clients, right? But maybe not, or maybe you're like, I hate Facebook. I don't want to be on Facebook. There's other options. So if you're thinking about who you really would love to work with, where are they at? If they're an author, if they're maybe more of a CEO type, then maybe LinkedIn. Some of my students like only focus on LinkedIn networking, and it's so much less saturated than Facebook. Facebook. So it has that going for itself. There's less people, less potential clients. But if they're if they want to work with someone who's a little bit more corporate, or a lot of authors are on there, then that's a great option. You have Facebook groups, especially if you're like going for coaching. You have Facebook groups. Especially if you're like going for coaches, parenting coaches, business coaches. Those type of people are definitely on Facebook. Instagram has been up on the upper. Instagram has been up on the uprise. And then the biggest one that's being talked about in my community is Clubhouse. So I think just because of the fact that you're like actually hearing someone talk live, that relationship is built quicker, and so that's why it's been effective for people. But Clubhouse, and effective for people. But Clubhouse, effective for people. But Clubhouse, and then also like Clubhouse, and then also like cold pitching. I just actually talked to someone today about how she about how she cold pitched. So she sent a cold email to an organization that she's really passionate about, and they don't have a podcast. She pitched them a podcast, and they said yes. And I'm like, I love when that.
Wow.
Like,
Nice.
that's impressive, right? Just cold
Yeah.
pitching to a podcaster is one thing. Cold pitching to just whatever. Now this is a very niched topic. It was a Native American type of business, and so it's it was a Native American type of business, and so it's like she's Native American, so it was like just a match made in heaven. But still, I was just like, oh gosh, I love this. So cold pitching people, podcasters doing it well. We could talk about mistakes there, but that's really effective too. But that's really effective too.
Well, you
Let's talk about
mentioned.
those mistakes.
Yeah, well, I wanted to follow up on the LinkedIn thing.
Mhm.
Oh, sure. Let's talk about those mistakes.
Yeah, well, I wanted to follow up on the LinkedIn thing.
Mhm.
Oh, sure.
LinkedIn, because I have podcast in my description or whatever, I get spammed by podcast promoters
Mm.
a lot. And how do you differentiate yourself from that pack?
Yeah, that's a good question. Specifically on LinkedIn. Is your
Yeah,
question?
specifically.
Yeah. Specifically on LinkedIn. Is your
Yeah,
question?
specifically.
Yeah.
LinkedIn is where I get the most of that, actually.
Mhm. Yeah. LinkedIn.
Yeah, specifically.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, specifically. LinkedIn is where I get the most of that, actually.
Mhm. Yeah. I would probably say like leading with value instead of just trying to like, hey, I love your podcast. Do you have a podcast manager? Instead of just like kind of just trying to like ring them in with that hook. I would say probably just leading with more value. I did a podcast episode with a LinkedIn. I don't know if she'd consider herself a LinkedIn expert, but a LinkedIn person. And guru. And she was talking about how she recommends people to use like an opt-in or a freemium PDF style thing on LinkedIn. So like you make a connection with someone, you chat for a couple minutes, and then you give them a freebie, not to capture their email, but just a freebie. And she said that works really well on LinkedIn. People are really looking for value, and so then at the end of the PDF or whatever, it has your contact information. But that PDF or whatever, it has your contact information. But that's what I've information. But that's what I've heard works well on LinkedIn information. But that's what information. But that's what I've heard work. That's what I've heard works well on LinkedIn. Yeah. So I feel like the way you talk would also just differentiate yourself from all of the other spammer types.
Daniel, you had a question.
Oh yeah, let's talk about the mistakes
Mistakes.
you mentioned. Oh yeah, let's talk about the Oh yeah, let's talk about the mistakes
Mistakes.
you mentioned.
Yes. Okay. Let me just think of the mistakes. I told you guys that I started a podcast with a friend. She's still doing it, but just by herself. And she'll tell me when people will reach out to her and say like, hey, do you have a podcast? When people will reach out to her and say like, hey, do you have a podcast manager? We'll just ask her. And she's like, please, I hope they are not in Lauren's group because this is bad. It's just a small circle. So I would say just like saying like, hey, oh, Daniel, I love your Instagram. I love your Instagram profile. I love what you post. Do you have a podcast manager? It's like, you're just waiting for it. You're just waiting for them to pitch you. So that I would avoid. I like to be really formal about cold pitching. Like I like to send an email and follow up. And so I know like people definitely cold pitch over DMs, but it just can be slimy. It's like you just have to do it. You have to be genuine. Actually, my daughters listen to a podcast. Actually, my daughters listen to a podcast called Kid Short Stories. I'm like their number one fan, and so I'll post about it on Instagram, and so I'll post about it on Instagram. And so I'll post about it on Instagram because it's like the cutest thing ever that my kids will sit for like 40 minutes and listen to this podcast. And so I was like unintentionally growing a relationship with this host, and he actually reached out to me recently and said, "Hey, I would love to get on a call with you to see if you would manage my show." And I don't take on clients anymore, so I referred him to someone else. But I was like, this was like the most organic relationship building, and it took like 6 months, I guess. But I wasn't really doing it on purpose. But yeah, that was very genuine. And so if you're in it for the long haul, I would say like tagging your favorite podcasters in your Instagram stories and doing things like that really help promote them, then you can get on their radar. And then maybe sending a formal email. That's like my favorite approach.
So it's providing value and building relationships again.
Yeah. Yes. Always. Always.
What a crazy idea.
Right. Not being spammy.
Don't be spammy.
Yes.
Who knew?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many DMs I have ignored over the years.
Yeah, well, I can't explain how many people I get that are like, "Hey, if you ever need help on your show, I'm a new podcast editor," and I'm like, "Do you know what I do? Because that doesn't sound
Right.
like it. I know a lot of podcast editors. I don't need any.
Yeah. Yeah, like if you're like just like the bare minimum amount of research. Like I get emails saying like, "Hey, I love your Instagram posts." It's like I haven't posted on Instagram in like a year and a half now. Like, what are you talking about?
Which one from 2019
Yeah,
are you
the one of my
referring to?
cat or the one of my logo? Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about?
Yes.
You mentioned the thing about people reaching out to you that are editors. One of the challenges that I've had in working with other editors, trying to bring some other editors like as subcontractors,
Mhm.
is effectively pre-screening in a way that doesn't waste their time and waste mine. Do you have
Mhm.
any tips on how you've helped people pre-screen so that
Ooh.
they know that the person that they're talking to is at least really close to being qualified before they ask them to invest some time in like a sample edit or something?
Yeah, yeah. I would probably start out assuming that they have some sort of experience, which I'm sure that they would. You're not going to be training them, right, on editing.
not.
Yeah. You're like, please no.
I don't have that kind of time. I'm
Right.
trying to get back time.
Right. So I would say just, having them send you an edit that they've already done. And I only need like 2 minutes. If I listen to a 2-minute clip, I can tell. I can tell what the positives and the negatives are. So it's not, I don't think that piece of it, listening, would be that time consuming. Maybe you do 5 minutes, but having them just submit from the get-go, I don't really care about what someone's experience is, like how many people they've worked with, or that number doesn't really matter. But what does their audio sound like? If you're hiring them as a subcontractor editor, you need to know that it sounds good. So give me maybe a before and after so I can see the difference. But 2 minutes, and I think you're like, okay, this is a yes or a no. And then from there, if you weed down, how many people that you have, then you could have maybe a 15-minute conversation, and then you can feel out their personality and things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah.
Okay, so
so
you
can we-
touched. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Nick,
go ahead.
I'll let you do it.
No, I was gonna ask. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Okay, so you
so can we-
touched. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Nick,
go ahead.
I'll let you do it.
No, I was gonna ask. Can you tell us a little bit more about? That's really good. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about? That's really good. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about? That's really good. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's in the course? I'm really curious about that.
Mhm. So it is 3 phases.
I'm really curious about that.
Mhm.
I'm really curious about that.
Mhm. So it is 3 phases. The first phase is learning the skills. So the skills being editing, uploading, scheduling, show notes, social media graphics, guest management, and media graphics, guest management, and launching. How to launch a show with a client. So those are the skills with a client. So those are the skills. And then like pulling stats. I always forget about that one. Delivering
Oh.
stats to clients. So those are the skills that I cover. And then the second phase is getting experience, getting testimonials, getting your confidence up, because Lord knows we all need a little bit of getting your confidence up, because Lord knows we all need a little bit of confidence boost. Right, you're like, okay, I'm ready to do. Right, you're like, okay, I'm ready to do this.
I feel attacked.
I know you so well. Third is actually launching your business. So how to structure your packages as a podcast manager, how to display your prices, and your how to design your prices and your how to design your proposals. So after you get on a call, the process of landing a client, like all of that stuff, onboarding, and then client boundaries. As I said earlier, I love client boundaries, and so that's part of that whole launching and growing your business.
And I should
I'm-
probably mention that so that just everybody is aware, I did buy Lauren's course, and that's how I connected with her.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit there, and I can say I'm probably only halfway through it because I have a tendency of taking multiple courses at the same time, which slows me down and is exactly what you shouldn't do. But I found it to be very helpful for the portion that I've made it through so far.
That's
So
great. That's
I thought
great.
it was very good,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the whole
which slows me down and is exactly what you shouldn't do. But I found it to be very helpful for the portion that I've made it through so far.
That's
So
great. That's
I
great.
thought it was very good.
Thank you so much.
the stat aspect intrigues me
Mhm.
because like I get on quarterly the stat aspect intrigues me
Mhm.
because like I get on quarterly calls with my clients and we look
Mhm.
at the stats.
Mhm.
Like like whenever I first got started out, I always wondered like how can I present the stats? I always wondered like how can I present the stats? Like give them like a report or something. How can I present the stats? Wondered like how can I present the stats? Like give them like a report or something so they can see like how their stats are going, and I never really kind of materialized something. So that's wondered like how can I present the stats? Like give them like a report or something so they can see. Wondered like how can I present the stats? Like give them like a report or something so they can see like how their stats are going, and I never really kind of materialized something. So that's aspect that kind of fascinates me
Mhm.
how you do that.
Yeah. So I find that thank you so much, Melissa. Yeah, I find that thank you that yeah, I find that yeah, I find that it's that yeah, I find that yeah, I find that it really depends on the I find that um, yeah, I find so I find that it really depends on the yeah. So I find that it really depends on the client. It's like people really love to like have a really smooth system, and I love systems. I love streamlining, but every client is different. And when it comes to stats, every client is different. Some clients want every number, or they already have a a metric dashboard that they want you to plug information into, and they love stats. That's then that person is gonna you love stats. That's then that person is gonna love stats. That's then that person is gonna want a lot, and they're probably already gonna have a system. There's other people that like I have a client and she's like, just Slack me like something you found interesting. So that's what we do. She doesn't. She's like everything is just kind of blends together. So I'll make sure that for her. So I'll make sure she knows when we're gonna hit like milestones and when she has like like when she's on the charts or something significant. And then also for her because she's just kind of interested in the highlight. And then also for her, because she's just kind of interested in the highlights, I'll also let her know, if she gets like a really great review or like a really unique review or something. So I'll tie reviews into that and just kind of, I feel like it's like an adrenaline shot. It's like, hey, by the way, the podcast is doing great. So I try to send her something minimally monthly for that person. So I really just try to see what they want. I have a system of like what I will send everyone and what I recommend. But then as you see what the client actually cares about, then you kind of trim away or expand based on what they care about the most.
And how often are you looking at their stats?
Most.
And how often are you looking at their stats?
Most.
And how often are you looking at their stats?
I would say weekly. I would say weekly, just because I'm scheduling for them. So like whenever I schedule, I'll just look and see, where we're at, and I'll do some math on, what things have looked like. And I don't know if you guys are Libsyn users, but now that Libsyn is updating, their stats are going to be like at the top, and they're going to show like 90-day download, 90-day downloads, and just some numbers that are actually really great to see.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, we're winning well for this. I'm kind of excited about it.
So if people are interested in this course and learning all about what you offer, how can they find it?
Yeah, so I have a master numbers that are actually really great to see.
How can they find it?
Yeah, so I have a master class where I go into how to become a podcast manager, even if you don't take my course, but I also talk about the course at the end. And so you get to hear about all of the phases that I spoke about earlier, but also the bonuses and kind of how the whole program works together. So I would say first for them to go watch my masterclass, because then they can get a really deep dive into what this is all about.
Is that on your website?
It's on my website, yes. But they can also. It's on my website, yes. It's on my website, yes. But they can also. It's on my website, yes. It's on my website, yes. But they can also get a seat at laurenwrighton.com/masterclass.
Very good.
And of course, we'll put all the links to everything in the show notes, which you can find at podcasteditorsmastermind.com. And then also we had a comment from Sophie.com. And then also we had a comment. And then also we had a comment from, so if you're listening to the audio playback, we had a comment from Elizabeth who said that I'm in the course and highly recommend it. So far in this one episode, you got 2 recommendations, one from Melissa and one from Brian. So
Yeah, this is great.
Two isn't bad, right?
Yeah, not so bad at all.
So what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this time with you?
Yes.
If you had to pick one thing.
I would say, considering that I'm assuming everyone that's listening is an editor. So with that in mind, I would say, if you're thinking about this, know that you can definitely do it. I think we kind of identify ourselves as one thing. And so can we be a podcast manager? Or are we just an editor? And there's a little bit of like value, like, am I worth that? Can I do this? Are my skills good enough? And so I would just say, I would just want to give some encouragement that if you're interested in this, I think you should look into it, take a step at a time, and just know that, hey, you can look into it, see if it's a good fit for you. If it's not, then no big deal. But I would just say, I would just say encouragement is what I would want to give across the sound waves.
So are we ready for the pod deck's question of the day?
I think we
I
are.
don't know if we'll ever
So
be
for those
ready,
watching
but-
and those listening, we do have a pod deck. They do not sponsor the show. Please don't tell them we do this because they may make us. So are we ready for the pod deck? So are we ready for the pod deck's question of the day?
I think we
I
are.
don't know if we'll ever
So
be
for those
ready,
watching
but-
and those listening, All right. So for those watching,
I don't know if we'll ever
so
be
for those
ready,
watching,
I don't know if we'll ever be ready, but
I think we
I
are.
don't know if we'll ever be ready, but
so for those watching or those listening, we do have a pod deck. They do not sponsor the show. Please don't tell them we do this because they may make us stop. But today's pod deck's question of the day has been slightly modified, and I just pulled it a minute ago, so I haven't had much time to think about it either. It is, what's the funniest name you can think of for a pets podcast?
What?
And the funniest name that you can think of for a pets podcast. And I'll go first. Mine is going to be Escaping the Hamster Wheel, Tales from the Cage.
That is too good. I'm not ready for this.
Should we do Daniel next?
Yes.
Throw you under the bus.
so mine is going to be a life coaching podcast for dog called Positive Outlook.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh my gosh. I'm the worst namer of podcasts, and not to mention pet podcasts.
Okay,
Jennifer,
here's
you gotta
mine.
go.
Yep. Cats and rats, life at my house.
Okay, gosh. I need to think of a dog one. Okay, gosh. I need to think of a dog one. I don't even know. You guys are too good. You guys have had some practice that I'm just not. I
Yeah, a couple episodes ago we did an improv class, so
Yeah.
there
I
you go.
just did that episode,
Episode
but yeah.
24, I think. Yeah.
Gosh, I literally have nothing. I'm sorry.
Should we let her
Okay,
off the
what's
hook?
the most boring idea of a pet podcast you could come up with?
Probably like my show, which is just like so like straight to the point. It'd be like the pet show.
there you,
There you go. That's
Okay.
the most boring one.
there you
There you go. That's
Okay.
the most boring one.
Whenever you say like you were blinking, I thought that was a perfect podcast for a goldfish.
There you go. That's
Okay.
the most boring one.
Whenever you say like you were blinking, I thought that was a perfect podcast for a goldfish.
I love it. So should we tell people if they want to be on the show and have to endure this kind of stuff with us, how they can do that? Should I do that?
Daniel. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Because Daniel's been doing all the work tonight. So if you're listening or watching and you think to yourself, man, I would love to impart some of my wisdom to these people, we would love to have you on the show. Whether you've got a question that you want to have us maybe help you think through, or you're an expert and you want to offer something like Lauren did about how other editors can up their game. Podcasteditorsmastermind.com/be a guest. That's all one word, be a guest. That's where you can find that information. We'll just ask for your contact info. If you have some topics that you're interested in, really easy questions, we'd love to get the opportunity to feature you on the show. Podcasteditorsmastermind.com/be a guest.
And if you are looking for the opportunity to build your portfolio and would like to edit a sample episode, we would gladly welcome you to do that. We have a sample that we send out to people who just want some practice. So if you go to podcasteditormastermind.com, we can help you out with that too. Just reach out to us and let us know, hey, I want to edit a sample of your show, and we'll get you hooked up.
We've done that for a few people. It's been really helpful, and I'm glad that the rest of us were able to provide enough information and enough stuff for somebody to have to edit that they could come out of that going, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, if you can edit this show, then you're well on your way.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Missing today was Carrie Caulfield Eric of YaYaPodcasting.com. I'm Jennifer Longworth, BourbonBarrelPodcasting.com, or at KY Podcasting on social media.
I'm Brian Ensminger. You can find me at Top Tier.
Yeah.
I'm Brian Ensminger. You can find me at toptieraudio.com. That's where it links to all of my social profiles, which interestingly are all at Top Tier Audio because I can remember that. And next to me is
I'm Daniel Abendroth, and you can connect with me and find everything at rothmedia.audio.
And I'm Lauren. Thank you so much for having me on the show. You can find me at laurenwrighton.com or on Instagram at instagram.com/Lauren or on Instagram at instagram.com/Lauren Wrighton.
I forgot to mention that Lauren also has a podcast. So if you are looking to get into podcast, if you are interested in getting into podcast management, if you are looking to get into podcast, if you are interested in getting into podcast management, her podcast would be a great way to start, and you can find that on her website at laurenwrighton.com.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. And again, podcasteditormastermind.com for past episodes. Like, subscribe, and leave us a review because it really helps with our downloads.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome.
Yay.
Let's see. That's how it goes. Should I rate it based on how I did or how StreamYard did?
Thumbs up. I'm hoping it's just. Excuse me.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
All right. Now we're done with the hard part. Oh. Don't forget to stretch. All right, so let me go and find our music. I think I did episode 18. I feel like it was in here somewhere. Maybe I'll just go ahead and open. There we go. Just grab that.
So
And we're live here. And we're live here on the Podcast Editor Mastermind Show. Thank you all for joining us, those of you who are watching the live stream and those of you who are tuning in to the podcast. I'm Jennifer Longworth of Bourbon Barrel Podcasting, and below me is...
Brian Ensminger of Top Tier Audio.
Yeah, sometimes Reaper doesn't bring in the or doesn't do the repeats. I can't remember how to force it, but
Bye.
so how much is that?
not too worried about it. Alrighty. So that is the episode. So now I need to bring this up, reset it. I feel like the volume's going to be all over the place. Whoops. So let's give it a whirl and what? Okay. Project. Oh, master mixed. All right, so let's see what we got. 5 minutes of render. 6 minutes, excuse me. So my guess is it's probably going to be too loud. And it's already shown that way. Actually, I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to bring up each one of these. So I know it's going to be a little bit off. Because this, so each track, so it's going through each track's mixer before it goes into the master limiter. So it is going to affect it a little bit, but I just kind of want to see if one like stands out as being way too loud. All right, so I'm going to let that go. So yeah, I'm going to run real quick and I will be back before this is over. All right, so it's actually looking not too bad. Still got 4 minutes to go. So if you're still watching, or if you're watching the replay, thanks so much for hanging out for this long. I know over 2 hours. I think it's still less than the last time because I didn't do RX in this session. So thanks for hanging out. Let's let this go. I don't know if you want to watch the rest of it. Let me know and I'll stick around. Otherwise, I might call it here pretty soon. Oh, excuse me. um, so yeah, let me know if you have any questions. You can always reach out to me on Facebook. Be sure to join the Facebook group. It's reaperforpodcasting.com/group will take you there. A lot of really smart people that know a lot about Reaper. Um, or if you're a smart person, come share your knowledge. If you have any questions for me that you want me to go over, you want to talk about, send me a message. And whenever I start doing the live Q&As, I'll gladly bring you on and we can discuss it. What else we got going on? I think that's about it. So yeah. Awkward silence. Yeah, so this is looking pretty good. It might be just a smidge too loud at 15.8, but it's not really enough for me to worry about. I'll just let it do its thing. So yeah, so thank you so much for hanging out. I will be doing this hopefully in 2 weeks. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and turn on notifications so you can be notified whenever I schedule the next one or whenever I go live. And also join the Facebook group. I will definitely post in there whenever I schedule the next live session or not live editing. And then whenever I do the Q&As, that's going to be inside the Facebook group. So it won't be on YouTube. That'll be in the group. And then these live edit with me's will be on the YouTube channel that I will announce in the group. So I think that's all. Thank you so much for hanging out. And I will see you. I guess I can just go back to the camera. But I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much.